to the African American Workers Union first annual Black Labor Conference. It will be held every Labor Day on September 1st, Monday in September, to take stock on how black labor is progressing in the city and in the nation. Labor Day, what does it mean? Federal holiday was established in June of 1894, designated to be the first Monday in September, dedicated to the social and economic achievements of American workers. It constitutes a yearly national tribute to the contributions of workers who have made the strength, prosperity, and well-being of our country. As African Americans, our first Labor Day started in 1526, when our first ancestors were brought here as slaves. Through the following 300 plus years, period ending legally in 1865 with the passage of the 13th Amendment. Our free labor built an enormous amount of wealth for this nation. Being our first annual Black Labor Conference, we want to establish in Pittsburgh in particular, but within the other cities that we're involved in, the idea of, on a medical field, how is our health in employment, in our ability to reduce unemployment, underemployment in our communities. Very, very good phrase nowadays, and with a very good movement that we support, the Black Lives Matter movement. Black lives have to matter in more than just stopping police officers from killing and murdering our black young men. But it also has to, we also have to look at the social economic aspects of our community. Okay, cut it. All you have to do is go into the X. We'll have to edit this. Yeah, that's all you have to do. Okay. Let's go back to the previous room. We'll edit it from Black Lives Matter in the comments in regards to Black Lives Matter. Okay. The common phrase right now of a movement of Black Lives Matter is very important to the African American or black community. It was established based upon the fact that there were a number of killings and murders of the African American community by police officers. Every 28 hours, an African American is killed by the police or vigilantes. This serious issue in our communities and across the nation is such that we needed to address it, and I'm glad that the Black Lives Matter movement has established their foothold in confronting this particular dastardly problem in our communities. But Black Lives Matter means more than just stopping police brutality. We all know that basically the historic purpose of the police was the capture of fugitive slaves. So in essence, this idea of police and African American or black community confrontation starts way back beyond what we see with Mr. Freddie Brown or with any of the other local or recent killings of African Americans. So we're looking at Black Lives Matter, okay? And if Black Lives Matter, stay with me, then black people must always be counted. Beyond the census and beyond being counted at times of collection of taxes or dealing with what our prison population might be as opposed to the majority population, we have to be counted in industry. We have to be counted in jobs. I mean, that's where the rubber meets the road for American capitalist democracy. As far as the average person, employment is their piece of the pie in this American dream. It can provide not only subsistence to your family, stability to your community, but it also provides for dignity and respect. And so we must be counted. Right now, the black employment picture or black employment for African Americans in this country are as such. There are 31.4 African American people, 31.4 million African American people in this country. 19.3 million are in the labor force, or I should say are the labor force. That's what we are capable of providing for this country in terms of employment. 17.5 million African Americans are employed at one level or another. Maybe it's full-time or part-time. We have 61.7%, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, participation rate. White employment, by the statistics of the Bureau of Labor Statistics, is that there are 197 million people in this country that are white. 123.3 of them are part of the labor force or have the capability of being in the labor force. 117.9% or 117.9 million white people are currently employed. They have a 63.2% labor participation rate. The white unemployment rate currently, as of August of 2015, is 5.1%. Black unemployment is said to be 12%. There's a range. The Bureau of Labor Statistics is reporting between 11.1 and 12%. But you can't always believe the employment or unemployment figures based upon what is just printed in the local press or paper. Because the way they calculate who is unemployed and who's going to be counted as unemployed does not include a lot of discouraged workers. Now, if African Americans, which normally have an unemployment process of over 6 months of being unemployed before, and it could be a lot longer, but generally around 6 months before they can get a job if they're unemployed. So during that time, they are not counted in the unemployment statistics. There is a process by which they can say a certain amount of percentage is included or could be included in the unemployment labor figure. But the reality is that there are a lot of people that are unemployed that are not counted. And in our community, the African American community, that is crucial, that we have everyone counted. Because if our unemployment rate is really 18 or 19% or 24%, then the reality is that we don't know how, and with a medical analogy, you don't know how sick you are unless you know what you are sick from and how much sickness you have. And in our case, we have to know as close to as exact what our sickness is and how deep our sickness is. And in our case, we are many times not counted. President Hoover once stated that there were 3 types of lies: lies, damn lies, and statistics. Now, the reality is that many times these statistics that we get from their statistical calculations and their processes does not reflect the reality of what's going on in our African American community. We usually see it from a process of trying to anecdotally kind of flesh out just how bad things are, usually having to deal with crimes or crime and drugs, and our participation, or I should say our inclusion, in the juvenile justice and in the criminal justice systems. Okay, but the real unemployment picture is this. Between the age of 17 and 20, recently, was brought out by the Bureau of Labor Statistics that basically 51.3% of high school graduates are unemployed. It also states that 23% of black college graduates are unemployed. Now just think of that. Over half of the people that graduate from high school aren't able to get a job within 6 months to a year, if that short a period of time. Some of them continually become the unemployed members of our communities. Black men, in particular, are in a permanent recession. Now, when we speak about a recession, usually you think within terms of a period of a year, 2 years, and at the outside, 5 years you might take to get out of a recession. African Americans since 1940 have been in, and that's the period of time when counting was nationally taking place, have been in a continual recession for employment. At least twice the rate of white male counterparts in our country, at least twice. Generally, it's more like 3 times the unemployment rate, and that's still not counting a lot of people we just discussed. 15% of all black males are unemployed right now, according to their own statistics. And in 2010, they said 19% of African American males were unemployed. So we're looking at a serious problem. Black women are not far behind. 9.6% currently by the Bureau of Labor Statistics are unemployed. And that's not counting many black women that are on some type of assistance. They're not included in that process. They're being taken care of and getting subsidies from the government. But the reality is that they're not really counted in terms of unemployment because they're not seeking work and they're not engaged in work. So in essence, they're part of the invisible part of our poverty that's in our communities. And so we have to consider that as well. Now in Pittsburgh, African Americans in Pittsburgh, it was just the study was just brought out by the economic database that was part of a recent study that made clear that African Americans in Pittsburgh make up only 7% of the employment population. 89% of the jobs go to whites. And this only highlights the fact of just how little labor participation African Americans have in Pittsburgh. Now there are 305,000 people in Pittsburgh. African Americans make up 79,000 people, over 79,000 people in Pittsburgh. Many of them are of working age. And the reality is that our unemployment and our underemployment and our poverty rate and our multi-generational poverty has been one that has made Pittsburgh one of the least diverse cities in the country. A recent study by Wallet indicated that out of 230 major cities across the country, Pittsburgh came in at 227. 227 other cities are ahead of Pittsburgh. And the worst city in the country for diversity was Erie, PA. So Western Pennsylvania has the title of one of the least diverse cities in the country. And that wasn't the only study that was done that indicated the lack of diversity in Pittsburgh. Now, what we're trying to do is reverse that situation. But the reality is that with some of the effects of some of these systems that are in place, it makes our job more difficult in terms of reversing the trend of us being the least diverse, one of the least diverse cities in the country. African Americans have a majority representation even when they are working in the lowest wage jobs in the city. Janitors, cleaners, security guards, housekeeping cleaners, home health aides, fast food workers are just some of the major categories or major job categories that have existed in Pittsburgh for a number of years that where African Americans are a majority in terms of being represented. These jobs also have the highest decline in wage level when it comes to being adjusted for inflation. The result, African Americans in Pittsburgh must work longer and at a lower wage to make ends meet. So African Americans working in Pittsburgh meet the definition of the working poor. The result is that we have multi-generational poverty. No matter how much you build Section 8 housing that helps to subsidize one of the biggest line items in a family budget, which is your housing. The reality is putting poor people into subsidized houses does not make them middle-class people. It does not include economic enrichment or wealth. It only subsidizes their poverty. It only makes them in a position whereas their poverty doesn't exacerbate beyond the realities of what they already have, which means their income is very low. So at this point, multi-generational poverty will increase because generation after generation, you have low-income wages from father to son, from mother to daughter, and in some cases from grandparents to their children. And so that's where we're at. Racism is at its best in Pittsburgh. When we look at some of the things that have occurred with economic development, we have spent close to $5 billion over the past 10 years for a little over 10 years, but about 12 years. We've had spent over $5 billion in economic development projects. We have built stadiums, we expanded convention centers, we built hotels, we built residential housing, we built other communities like the South Side. And what we have not seen, though, is the participation when it comes to labor from African American communities. That's because they have been locked out from the process due to discrimination by the unions and by these games that they play with workforce development and Section 3 housing and other types of games that they play for us to play segregated Jim Crow participation in construction. It's been marginal, and and especially marginalized African Americans in terms of their participation with the wealth building that comes with these billions of dollars from federal, state, county, and city funding. So what we have to do is to reverse that. And what we will want to do is that in the future, that we will be ahead of the curve when these funds are coming or are in the process of being established on these projects, that we are part of the process of how we participate in labor with these projects. Unfortunately, in the past, we have always been behind the curve. And it's not without some participation or conspiratorial participation by some of us, African Americans, that are hired as consultants to make sure that the numbers always look right when they talk about things like minority business, which we're just about to get into, or that they're hired as consultants to establish so-called workforce development programs that are only meant to hide the real cancer that's underneath that Band-Aid that we consider as workforce development or Section 3 housing or Section 3 employment with some of the housing developments that have been built. You can go to our website at aaw.us and you will see some uploaded DVDs or uploaded programs, I should say, that basically will explain that dynamic in a more thorough way than I can right now, because we're dealing with just labor process in terms of where we are with Labor Day. But you could go there or to YouTube, and we should shortly have the program established where we're talking about black labor and we're talking about the construction industry that you'll be able to see. And that'll be very short. The illusion of inclusion is part of the Jim Crow construction process. It's also involved in terms of our tokenistic fantasies that we see when we see black people, one or two here, and say, oh, there must be blacks working here, but it's not true. And a lot of minority business is also part of this illusion of inclusion, because to understand what a minority is really detrimental to our real idea of progress or understanding of progress, because it's racism with a smile. It's saying y'all are included, but nobody knows exactly what y'all means. And minority is like a y'all. Y'all being Asian, y'all being Alaskan Native, y'all being American Indian, y'all being Native Hawaiian, or other Pacific Islander. That's the basic context of a racial or ethnic minority. And so, whether they be Hispanic or these others, the reality is that that's what they're talking about when minority. Of course, African Americans or blacks are supposed to be included in that. But would you like to go to your doctor, have your blood pressure taken, and then they don't tell you what that actual blood pressure count means? In other words, they say, oh, it's sort of like this or it's sort of like that, but they don't give you the actual numbers as far as what your blood pressure is. This is what minority is like. It's like ambiguous. It's ambiguous. And if Black Lives Matter, we have to identify what it is and who we are, or what we are and who we are, in the context of what there is to get of the pie. And you can't quantify that which you cannot count, that which you cannot identify. The term minority does not qualify as a way to see what the health of the black labor of black labor is in American society. It hasn't been for the last 60 years, 70 years. It hasn't been there. And the reality is that this ambiguous term is like having 2 jars filled with salt and sugar. From a distance, you can't tell who's what, or what is what. So the reality is that that's like minority. Are they Hispanic? When we talk about the monies that they said we got as a minority, are they specific Islanders? When they said we got this amount of money from contractors, well, it could be any, and you don't know, unless there's specific numbers attributed to who and what was the firm in terms of its racial or ethnicity, what it was. It's a salt and sugar situation. Minority business term gives African Americans what we say, the business. Because over these years, millions of dollars have been attributed, and almost hundreds of millions of dollars have been attributed to minority business, but in fact, you don't know who really got it because you don't know, and there's not specifics as to who those African Americans or blacks are. We believe that there should be this idea of minority business equals black labor, which is what they usually pronounce on these different projects that are put forth. They'll say, oh, they got $60 million worth of work, minorities. But you don't know whether or not African Americans got that work. And then at the end of the day, they say, well, we don't know who those individuals were that were so-called minorities that got the money that was supposed to be attributed to the project. So in construction in particular, normally not, the black minority business equals black labor. And that's been one of the biggest faults of why we have built over these $5 billion worth of work in economic development projects over the years. And African Americans still are in these relatively big pockets of poverty and multi-generational poverty, whether it's in the Hill District, whether it's in East Liberty, whether it's in Larmer, whether it's on the north side, whether it's in the south side, whether it's in Homewood. There are just so many areas of which we have this enormous amount of pockets of poverty that they get money for every year through community development block grants based upon the poverty tracks that are in these various communities. So they actually get the money to do these things and to so-called enhance the population or enhance the economic stability of the community. And at the same time, when all this economic development takes place, you rarely see that the community actually gets wealth out of it. But yet they'll say, we got $60 million that was given to so-called minority. So we've got to get beyond this term minority because it doesn't equal what it is that we are versus in minority business as opposed to black labor that you can count. I mean, the IRS can count income that individuals get. That's where the rubber meets the road. When it comes to minority business, you don't know whether or not that minority business is actually African American or what can be attributed to African American wealth from the project. If Black lives are to matter, black people must count. And we must count ourselves, and we must make sure that we are being counted by those people that are trying to say that we are part of the process, that we are part of this so-called equal opportunity that's supposed to be taking place with these various projects and various areas of economic growth. If Black Lives Matter, politicians and black leaders, as well as white politicians, they must be held accountable. And the only way that you can hold people accountable is that you establish that these reports are actually a report card on what kind of job they're doing. If they're not doing their job, we shouldn't see reports by various social organizations, or whether it's the Urban League, whether it's the NAACP or whomever, and not make that determinant as to the job that these people that we elect are doing. We must hold them accountable. So we must count and then establish whether or not they are returning the investment of our vote in actual progress in our communities or and for our people. And that can only happen when you move towards accountability and being able to count. So if Black Lives Matter, we must count. I would hope that the evolution of the movement will be such that it will push this agenda forward in terms of our being nationally involved as Black Lives Matter. Because this is where the rubber meets the road. If our lives are to matter, it's not only about police not killing us. It's not about us only holding accountable these individuals that are supposed to protect and serve us, but it also has to do with the economic and social aspects of what Black lives are. And when we have a situation where our unemployment over the decades continues to be twice or sometimes 3 times or more in terms of unemployment, being higher than that of the majority culture, than a majority race, then the reality is that something's not being done. Things are not happening to relieve our stress, to relieve our misery, to undermine our oppression. The reality is that we must hold accountable those people with the report card of, if we count Black lives, then we expect that our Black lives will matter economically, socially, in the culture in the United States or the American economy. So they must be held accountable. So I hope that we have been a little informative for you today. We, of course, will have other reports to community, and especially on Labor Day, the reality of where we are. What is our heart rate? What is our blood pressure? What is our health in this American society? And at that point in time, once we understand what that is, then we know that there has to be certain remedial things that are done to make it happen. And, as it states, Black lives have to count if they are to matter. Thank you. Okay, so